Welcome to episode 5 of the Insecure Agents podcast. I'm your host, Allie Howe, and today we have Harry Wetherald, CEO of Maze, with us to talk about using AI agents to remediate vulnerabilities and orchestrating those agents to accomplish that goal. Harry, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks for having me on, Ali. Yes, I'm Harry, co-founder and CEO of a company called Maze, relatively new startup. We just kind of came out of stealth a few weeks ago, actually. And yeah, what we're doing, as you mentioned, is building AI agents that almost like replicate what an expert security engineer might do when they're looking into a cloud vulnerability, right? So going off, investigating it in massive amounts of detail, looking at all sorts of different contexts from a cloud environment, and then helping companies ultimately figure out which vulnerabilities they need to fix, which ones have absolutely no risk, and then helping them actually fix the ones that do need fixing. So it's been a lot of fun so far building that product over the last year. And as I said, we literally just launched it a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, hopefully we have a few interesting things to share about what we learned along that way.
That's such an important and meaningful problem to be solving. I know from my work as a VC, so I help startups with SOC 2 compliance, vulnerability management is a required part of that. And for many small teams, it's completely overwhelming to have thousands of vulnerabilities be picked up by all these different scanners and not know which of them are actually exploitable within their environment. So, what happens is these teams end up wasting hours of very valuable manpower to go and patch vulnerabilities that they really don't even need to be focusing on. So, I'm just curious, what makes AI agents better at filtering through what is exploitable and what is not?
Good question. Well, by default, they're not, right? Like if you don't use them well, they will be much worse than other approaches, basically. It's kind of like the classic thing in security vendor land where everyone just kind of says, hey, we're using AI or agents or whatever it is, and then makes it seem like that by default makes it better. But the trick is basically that if you take enough care and attention with agents, as you well know, you can get them to do very complex, very long running tasks that typically require a lot of like human level intuition or reasoning. And that's the feature of them that makes them so good for investigating and helping to fix vulnerabilities. Because with a vulnerability, to really, really understand it in all the detail you need in the context of a cloud environment on the customer side, you need to be able to put together a lot of different pieces of data, right? And sometimes that data is stored as just like text, like a vulnerability kind of advisory. Hey, how this vulnerability is exploited. Other times it's stored as all sorts of different kind of like semi-structured data from around the cloud environment. So why agents are so amazing at that at dealing with this is they can just go step by step by step by step through all that data, right? And they never get tired, they never get bored. They just are able to just churn through it step by step by step by step. And by doing that, they can just keep thinking up new things like, oh, well, I wonder if this variable was different. Would that make this vulnerability exploitable? Right. And then they can just go off and look into that, gather all the data, gather all the things they need, think about it for a little bit, bring it back. And so they're able to almost, in a sense, do what it takes quite a qualified human hours to do by the time you've gone and gathered all the data and put it all together. They can do that, but they can do it automatically, right? So you don't actually care how long it takes them. They can do it in maybe minutes, but they can do it tirelessly, concurrently. And so you kind of get this like human level insight across things that you would never usually be able to scale a human to.
I was wondering too, when using all of those different AI agents, I read in the Business Wire article that covered your raise something about you are able to deploy thousands of agents to a tenant at a time to be able to do vulnerability management at scale. And I was wondering, what is the cost associated with that? If you're able to share, or like, I guess, like, I mean, I'm assuming based on, where all this is headed, that deploying thousands of agents is cheaper than having a senior security engineer go and patch all these vulnerabilities themselves. But what does that look like? And what is your $25 million raise going to enable you to do in the future?
Yeah, you're right. Cost is like one of the most difficult parts of this because, as you know, like a single call to a large language model can cost non-trivial amounts. And so the kind of agents we run, they might call large language models 30, 40 or more times, right? And so once you add up all those different calls, even a single investigation can end up being a non-trivial amount of money. And then we work with Fortune like 200, Fortune 50 customers. So they have millions of vulnerabilities across millions of assets. And so when you add all those investigations up, suddenly you get to some very, very big numbers very quickly. So a lot of what we've spent our time on in the last 12 months has been holding performance at kind of like a steady level or improving it whilst decreasing the cost to us. And that's a really not spoken about enough area of building with agents so far, because I think a lot of times we just haven't scaled them to massive enterprise use cases yet in a lot of cases. But you have to basically be able to do both. You have to keep the accuracy really high whilst figuring out how to make the cost go down lower and lower over time so you can make it manageable for a customer. Like our pricing is nothing crazy compared to other security products. And that's had to come out of months and months and months of us kind of working it down. So yeah, it's not easy at all, but I think it's also not an impossible problem. And there's lots of different techniques you can use to almost like take what you learn by running it in a very unoptimized state, and then think about how do you take that very unoptimized state of your agent initially and what it's able to achieve, and then think about, okay, how do I kind of hold the level of reasoning at a constant level whilst reducing the number of LLM calls that I need to do every single day. And that's kind of how we've ended up bringing it down over time for the most part.
Yeah, that makes sense, and if I put my software engineering hat back on for a second, I'd start to think about, okay, maybe, you could be using, like, some sort of, like, a Redis queue or something, if to see, like, hey, if maybe, in this customer's tenant, we had to go look up this CV and this information, we already, made that LLM call, we already went out to that API so we can cache it for at least, like, a day, and with that data and assume that it's the same, so you can end up not making the same calls over and over again, so maybe you could save money that way. I'm sure there's lots of tips and tricks like that. What other, like, top takeaways or learnings do you have for others that might be looking to orchestrate AI agents and the technical implementation of just making all of that work together in production?
Yeah, so many things. I think the biggest takeaways have been that we are still so early in building with agents. I'm sure you get this like every episode of this. It's so early in building with them, and you see that when you start building with them and pushing the edges because you start running into really funny things. So like we have frequently over the last year run into a problem where we're like, someone must have solved this before, or like this must be happening. We must not be the first people to run into this. And then you go on a forum and it's like, 1 week ago, the founder of one of the agent frameworks has posted about this problem exactly because it's just been discovered. So like it's so early so that if you're really pushing these things and pushing them to the limits, you find that you're really at the edge of what the world knows about them, which is like fun and challenging at the same time. It means that unlike other software engineering tasks, like there's often not an answer just out there in the world. You kind of have to go figure it out on your own. So a lot of what we've done is kind of trying to blend what we know people have kind of figured out in the last year or two with our own experimentation and our own frameworks. And so a lot of what we've built is kind of like a Frankenstein of the two, a little bit relying on some pre-existing framework, a little bit building something ourselves because we could see where that framework was kind of breaking. So a few of those places where things break are cost is a big one. You mentioned that straight away. I think a lot of people, when they see their first agent running in production, they're like, wow, this is amazing. Works great. Like now we just rolled it out everywhere. And then they don't realize that if that agent, calls 20 LLMs or an LLM 20 times, suddenly that if you roll that out across a big enterprise use case, it's going to break. Scale is another one. Like we've hit all sorts of scaling limits in various different ways, particularly with the LLM providers themselves. Like there's been rate limiting and other things we've had to kind of tackle along the way. I think basically the world's demand for LLMs is so high that there's actually kind of rate limiting in place between different parties. So you have to kind of make your case why you deserve to unlock those limits, basically. So that's been another challenge we've kind of had to tackle. And then the other big challenge is that the frameworks for agents, so LangChain, AutoGen, LangGraph, etc., they were all built so early on, right? They were built basically on about day one of someone coming up with the idea of an agent. By about day four, we had a bunch of agent frameworks. And that was great. It helped everyone kind of like start working with them more quickly, start playing around, building hobbies on the weekends, that kind of thing. But what you very quickly find out when you try and roll these agents out, those kind of frameworks out on like very big enterprise use cases, is it's just a bunch of features missing from those frameworks that you would need to make them work at large enterprise scale. So what we found along the way is we kind of had to like Frankenstein our own framework together along the way to cover those gaps to make sure that it actually works at large scale and at the cost we need it to and all those kind of things. And I'm sure that in the next year, right, the frameworks will start catching up and for new people building with them, things should get a little bit easier. But yeah, that's definitely been a big challenge of the last year is you can't assume that some really popular framework is going to work for you. You need to kind of like find the boundaries of it and then be willing to kind of build upon it yourself to make it work for your use case.
Yeah, that's super interesting to hear. I think that really resonates with some of the feedback I heard at the AI Engineer Summit in New York City and back in February. They talked about suggesting when you're very first building an agent, don't even start with a framework, start with just your use case and then add on the framework later, just because they might not be mapped to your use case. And I know certain frameworks offer different features than others, and there's always a race to keep up with what one framework is doing, the others want to catch up. And it's hard to anticipate what everyone's going to need from those frameworks because, as you mentioned, just we're so early with that. I know some frameworks, have different security advantages too compared to others, like taking into consideration like token limits and also different like memory standards and how they handle that. Kind of reminds me that agent development is very much like cloud security, where it's a shared security model. Like you cannot just rely on your framework for everything, not security, not the, production level quality or managing cost and scale and all of that. Certainly they're getting there and they're getting much better, and some are better than others, but that's a great call out that, maybe we're still not there yet and there's some custom implementation needed on our end as developers. One other thing I wanted to touch on was going back to the scale that you were talking about, how like humans don't scale and AI does. I think we're starting to recognize, if we haven't already, as a security community, that we need to use AI to govern AI. One of my OWASP colleagues, Rock Lambos, had a great LinkedIn post the other day, and he wrote, "We need to accept that we need AI to govern AI. Human in the loop does not scale." I think that's absolutely true. The attackers are going to be using AI for cyber attacks and leveraging that. We might as well be using them for defense. I think Maze is a wonderful example of that. How did you come up with this idea or vulnerability management in the first place? Or that, how did you decide like that's what I want to tackle for like me and my startup?
Yeah, good question. So I 100% agree with that point. And I think the thing that always fascinates me that we kind of touched on earlier is I don't necessarily think, I think when people first think about like AI versus AI and security, they suddenly go to like some kind of movie level, like super intelligence versus super intelligence going on. I don't think that's where we'll go, at least not in the medium term. I think basically what will happen is a bunch of stuff that used to take a human a bit of time, right? A few hours or a few days or a few weeks is going to become automatable, which means that we're going to be able to do it at 100,000, 10,000 times the scale. And that's basically true on both sides of the fence. So a bunch of moderately complex things that used to be kind of out of reach of most ordinary low level attacks suddenly won't be something that takes an attacker a day, a week, 4 weeks to execute. It'll be something that they can just do with the click of a button and a little bit of expense, right? But they'll be able to do it, therefore, at such bigger scale. And so I think what we'll end up seeing is rather than this like super intelligent style of attack, I think instead we'll just see the kind of attacks we already know, but we assume a reasonably low volume, right? Will just become a way higher volume. And so that's why I think on the defense side of things, the same kind of paradigm is a good one to think about, which is what are some things that we actually already kind of know and know how to do and know we should be doing, but we just can't because we can't scale. And how do we go off and do those, right? So rather than thinking at the really, really extreme advanced end of the scale, what do we already know we should do better and how do we do it? And so vulnerability management is a great example of that. Like go speak to any security team and ask them how they're doing with vulnerability management. And they'll probably kind of do a combination of, I don't know, rolling their eyes and kind of like clenching their fist because it's such a frustrating problem to try and deal with. And they'll also probably, when kind of like talk to you for a little while about it, admit that like they don't feel fully comfortable with how they're dealing with it. They know that there are a bunch of vulnerabilities in their backlog that they could easily lead to a breach, and they just aren't able to get to them all. And so that's why for me, it's a great example of one of these problems where we kind of know what we need to do. An expert human could do the work if we had thousands more of them, but we aren't going to have that. And so if we're going to counter this kind of threat from the attacker side of moderately complex attacks happening way more often, I think vulnerability management is one of the key places we need to go up, not just like get 2x better at, but get 100 times better at in order to counter like much, much, much more widespread, reasonably or moderately advanced vulnerability exploitation. So from that point of view, that's kind of why we think it's one of the best problems at the moment to be working on with AI in mind. The other reason why we're working on it is you mentioned earlier those kind of like backlogs that your clients struggle with, where they've got developers kind of wasting their time or other people wasting their time trying to fix them. That was once us, right? So we, all three of us founders, led product and engineering teams. At like I led product management at Tessia, and the others worked at places like Elastic and Amazon and a few others. And we'd all just been on the receiving end of this problem where we were like, there is no way that we have to fix this many vulnerabilities, right? There's just no way. We need to get on with shipping features. Like that's the core of our roles. So honestly, part of it is just like selfishly solving an old problem for ourselves where the volume seemed way too high, but we knew there was important stuff in there. So yeah, I think it's a problem that's very, very well suited to this kind of new technology. It just is a bit fiddly to get it fully working.
For sure. Those are the best problems where you've, experienced it yourself, so you understand the pain points, you understand what a good solution would look like, and then you're able to dive into it from there. Yeah, I think vulnerability management is a great area for first use case for AI agents and AI in general. And I think SOC teams like security operations centers are also starting to use AI for alert triage and all of that. Are there any other areas right now in security that are you think are ripe for AI agents to come in and take over?
Yeah, I honestly, I've said this to a lot of people, and some people look at me like I'm a bit crazy. I honestly think that every single type of security tool is going to get pretty much rewritten in the next like 5 years. And that isn't going to all happen overnight. But I think that what I've seen so far with what agents can do, they are so mind-blowingly better than the approaches we used to use, that there is just no way that we shouldn't be replacing pretty much every security tool with something that uses something agentic under the hood. That doesn't mean to say it should happen in the next 6 months or a year. There are certain use cases that aren't really well suited to agents yet, and agents on their own have a fair way to go to become, as we talked about, lower cost and quicker and all sorts of other features. But I think in the next maybe 5 years or roughly in that time frame, we're going to see pretty much every category of security start to change. The reason for that, in my opinion, is pretty much every category of security is just kind of a yes no machine, right? Like it sucks in some data and it basically gives you like thumb up, thumb down, or thumb somewhere in the middle. Like, yeah, that looks good, that looks bad, don't know. And even our very, very, very best tools, right? The most successful security companies of the last like 10 years, they're not successful because they're perfectly accurate. They're successful because they're kind of like the least inaccurate thing in their category. If we look at something like, the best EDR tools, the best CNAP tools, the best MDR tools, right? They've all been done very well and got a huge amount of respect for like the way that those tools have been built. But if you actually boil it down, they're full of false positives and they let stuff through, right? So they might be good relative to what we had before, but they're not like their accuracy isn't high in just general terms. So what you see then when you start working with agents is the reason why all those tools are so inaccurate is they barely capture much of the context of the problem they're trying to look at, right? So they're kind of like looking at very small snippets of data and they're having to very quickly come to a decision based on some kind of rule that a human has built or maybe some kind of like more primitive machine learning model. They look at like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, 20 pieces of data and they're like, cool, this is good, bad, or somewhere in between. And what an agent does instead is it can look at as many pieces of data as it wants. It can look at structured data or unstructured data, and it can just slowly work through the data, right? In the same way that a human would, where it goes, cool, I've seen what the problem is. I'm going to go look for something else. And now I've seen what that next bit, I'm going to go look for something else. And so agents are so much better at understanding the context of a security problem. And if we think that almost every security product struggles with understanding context, and we think agents are better at understanding context, then the next logical step is that agents are going to replace most of how we do security today. And so, as I said, I think it's going to happen like slower in places than people think, but I do think it's going to happen almost everywhere. And probably the first places to change will be the things that are slowest moving today, right? So the one problem with agents is a single agent might take 3 minutes to run. So you can't have them doing things where you need it to be like 100% real time, but they're great for things that you maybe want to do every few hours or every day, like vulnerabilities, for example. So I think maybe the things that we last to change are the things we need to be absolutely real time. Like, for example, like an identity check, an identity check in an SSO flow, for example, could probably benefit from agentic reasoning in places, but it probably will be like the last to change because agents running that quickly is going to take us quite a while to get to.
I really like the point about AI agents being better at context gathering. And also reminds me of, like, the Software 3.0 speech that came out or the trend that people are anticipating where the general internet is going to be rewritten for agents instead of humans to be intaking, and I wonder if different security tools will, eventually, be run by AI agents, and then those agents will communicate together between different tools to be able to come up with, like, a high-level summary or, an action plan for a user, and I imagine that's how AI agents will also generate context eventually is by talking to other agents from other security tools. So that's going to be an amazing thing to see for sure.
Exactly. It potentially breaks down a lot of the silos that we have because a lot of the silos we have in security come from certain security tools only seeing into like certain windows of data, but then also like the integration between them being just a hard problem to solve. And it's a hard problem because you've got to write a lot of logic about how data from product A fits with data from product B. And so writing that logic and going through all that effort and building all the integrations ends up being just about enough effort that it doesn't happen as often as it should do. So we end up with all these kind of like silos of data. And it's a problem we've obviously been trying to solve for years with like seams and all sorts of other kinds of ways of doing it. But the interesting thing about agents is you need to write way less logic for them to understand like some form of data that you throw at them. So theoretically, as you said, we might end up in this world where we can just have lots of agents that are maybe specialized in different tasks, but where they're very easily able to kind of communicate with each other. And potentially we end up with way less silos, and maybe we end up with way different security tooling categories, like full stop. Like maybe in 10 years' time, we'll look back and all our categories might look quite different because all the kind of silos have been broken down in places, and we have a very different way of kind of building a security stack.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And I'm thinking of like a whole new like I don't know, it could be a startup idea for somebody is like I've seen it where, if you're a centralized security team in a much larger organization, like there's definitely silos just with the people there too. Like, as a security team, if you're centralized, you're not on the infrastructure team, you're not on the engineering team. I mean, you interface with those teams, but you don't know those two environments the same way that the people on those teams do. So you often have to go and talk to them to think, okay, we might roll out like a different level of cryptography here. Like I'm thinking like, this is what we need to do for compliance. We need to have like this algorithm in place, but I don't know if it's actually going to break anything or what that actually means for you and your teams, like how much of a pain that is for you to implement, what that actually looks like. So maybe I could just like go chat with their coding agent or something that's a knowledge expert, their code base or their infrastructure, just to like save bandwidth there between humans, be able to context gather that way with like, my agent from the security team talking to one from infrastructure or engineering. I don't know. It sounds like a really impactful, different way to go about it, and definitely something that would be exciting in the future.
Yeah, I love that. And it's back to context again, right? Like what you're trying to gather there is context. So if an agent in some other team's workflow already has loads of context about that team and what they're up to, then you should just be able to go interact with it if it knows the context. That's the crux of all of this. It's like agents being able to understand context in a way more meaningful way. And then I think that changes kind of everything slowly about how we build security tools and teams.
So what's next for Maze? If people want to go try out Maze or see a demo or learn more about it, what can you tell us?
Yeah, so we just launched a couple of weeks ago, so it's now open to everyone. You're very welcome to go to the website and contact us, and we can give you a demo. Or if you want to go ahead and do a trial, we're also very happy to do that. And really, what's next for us is we are kind of just building out our platform to tackle more and more and more different tasks that require the same kind of like deep expert level reasoning to go off and investigate them and help you fix them. So today we do kind of cloud vulnerabilities, but the next steps there are kind of just taking that paradigm of agents that can go look into a security risk, figure out how bad it is, and help you fix them, right? Just expanding that into more and more and more different different avenues to help people get on top of all the different noise they have. And hopefully, if the prediction is right that like attacks are gonna rise and rise in complexity, then hopefully give people the ability to do something in response to that that's going to give them kind of level playing field back in their favor.
Amazing. Maybe too someday we'll see you open source an AI agent framework since you're on the front lines of all that.
If we had like a minute of free time, we would actually love to like explore. So we have actually talked about stuff like that. We have a pretty cool framework that we've built over the last year that we could use for other types of things. So yeah, I think whenever we kind of stick our head up from what has been a pretty hectic few weeks of launching and kind of getting the product out there, we'll have a think about how we can help share more with others about how we kind of put the framework together and how we continue to improve and add to it as well.
Well, wonderful. Any other closing thoughts you want to leave with us today?
No, I think the main thing, and I always say this to people, is just like these agents are so easy to get started with. Just go and have an experiment. Like just go and throw like it can be any use case. It could be a security use case, could just be some other use case in your own life. But you need to get to that like aha moment of, oh wow. You start to see how things are going to change quite quickly once you see it actually happen in live action. Like doesn't mean to say that it's very easy to turn that into something that you can use every day. But I'd always say to people, if you're intrigued in this area, just go and have a little experiment over the weekend. Build an agent yourself. Doesn't need to be something that scales or performs perfectly. You just want to see how it works through some kind of complex investigation or some kind of complex task you want it to do, and they're a lot of fun.
Absolutely. That's great advice. Yeah. So you can read the books and do the courses, but just getting your hands dirty and experimenting and playing around is definitely one of the best ways to learn. So that's awesome advice. Thank you so much, Harry, for your time today. And I look forward to continuing following Maze's success. Where can people connect with you if they want to continue the conversation?
Best place is LinkedIn, so you can find me there. We'll share the link. I also have a blog I write on Substack, and then you can check out May's website.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. That's it for episode 5 of the Insecure Agents podcast with Harry Wetherald, CEO of Maze. We'll see you next time.